Russell Cain Sauer. I'm a retired aviation electrician's mate, Chief Petty Officer. I served in the United States Navy from 25 April 1989 until 30 November 2010, retiring out of Pax River. Here today to talk about some sea stories. I have one in particular I wanted to talk about, and from the perspective of two sailors. We had an airman deploying on his very first deployment on a United States Navy frigate, the USS Boone, FFG 28. And then we had a chief petty officer that was making his final and last deployment before he was getting prepared to retire from the Navy. That airman is now a senior chief petty officer and on his way to becoming a chief warrant officer. He calls me every year when he finds out about his promotion status, and I tell you what, it's really great to hear from him every year. Anyway, on to the story. We deployed on the USS Boone after some delays because the ship was having problems with its superstructure. They were able to repair that. It was a standing Naval Maritime Group deployment in 2006, and it was my first deployment as a detachment chief petty officer. We finally got underway after some ship repairs and set off bouncing around from port to port, basically showing off the flag. And we were under a Canadian guided missile cruiser, I think. Anyway, a Canadian ship was our flagship for the deployment. And one day while cruising along in the Mediterranean Sea, I don't know, I think we were doing about 20 knots. And I was down in the chief's mess. And the quartermaster chief comes down in a panic and tells me that the ship has no steering. And we were like, well, have you tried aft steering? Sure, they've tried aft steering. No steering at all. So I'm like, as the aviation guy, the brown shoe, I'm like, why don't we turn off the screw that's pushing us through the water and just go dead in the water? Great idea. So we go dead in the water. They send the Canadians over because they had a diving team on board. They send them over on a rib boat. Divers go down. We're all standing on the flight deck after the ship, waiting on the divers to come up. And the divers come up with the confirmation that the rudder of our ship had in fact fallen off. So this was also while we had HSL 48's aircraft in the air. So that was going on as well. So we were in flight quarters. We now have a dead ship in the water. And so we're scrambling to get our aircraft landed on another ship and deal with what was going on our ship. So we were towed 200 miles to Rota, Spain by a Spanish oiler, and pierside repairs were scheduled there. Fortunately, through how small our Navy is, I was able to reach out to the Spanish Navy and contact Bob Lombard, who is a Sikorsky tech rep and who is also the man that taught me how to do compass calibrations. Well, he happened to be there as a field service rep for Sikorsky, representing Decima Escuadrilla. And we were able to shore base our helicopter operations there in Spain and keep our pilots qualified. Back to that airman. Throughout all our workups, all our deployment, and just being sailors going to sea, I had one airman in my detachment, and he was my trouble child. He was, he needed some come alongside time, and from Baltimore. So, airman from Baltimore still had that Baltimore mentality about him, and the advice I gave him was, look, you and I both come from some bad areas. And I don't know about you, but I left that bad area intentionally. I enlisted in the Navy to get away from it. I commended him for being so proud of where he was from, but I understood that it was a hardened shell that he was used to wearing as an armor or a protection. So I needed him to take that armor off and start building his new armor that he was working on, and getting him to refocus and recage to why did he even enlist? Why did he take the steps he did to change his life if he's going to keep bringing up the past? And, so this was the beginning of this young man's career. And the way I felt about the level of my career where I was at, being that it was my final deployment, I felt like I was terminal pay grade. So I stayed focused on my sailors. Whatever actions I took were focused on them, and it didn't ever have to reflect on where it would get me in life, because that's not what I was focusing on. I was focusing on where do I get these sailors, one, through this deployment, and two, through their lives, because they left, a lot of us left a bad situation or a bad place to make a better lives for ourselves. And so through naval tragedy of material condition problems, I was able to focus on the one thing I could control that whole deployment, and that was the people I was with, and the people I was around, and making sure that we took care of each other throughout that deployment. And so that's my sea story.
Cain Sauer out.